All right. We're live with Catherine Ross, CEO of Ross Creative Works. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, James.
Awesome. I'd love to just kind of jump right in and dig into kind of how you started your agency, where you got started, but what was the moment when you decided to just go all in and start your own agency?
I came from a graphic design background and I always wanted to do more. I always wanted to work on bigger projects. And coming out of working in various graphic design positions, I started taking on freelance roles and doing freelance projects. But I discovered there was a ceiling to that, right? You need to have a team in order to truly execute on those higher levels. And that was what really motivated me to start to build out an agency to be able to take on those bigger projects and some of those exciting initiatives and to build out a team of people and work with people and build out people. It's really fun teaching people new skills and watching people grow in their new skills. I might have started in one place with that desire to do bigger things, but it also turned into the excitement of watching a team grow as well and seeing how a team can work and execute.
Absolutely. I feel like I've had the stretch to deal with as well with that kind of transition process. But how have you dealt with that of being like you're a freelancer before, just executing on your own to like when you start an agency, you have to deal with, like you said, like growing a team and management and all the business aspect of it, sales. Like there's so many different roles. But how did you kind of handle that transition? And what were kind of some maybe some hurdles or challenges along the way?
I think that, like many small business owners, I made the mistake of trying to do too much myself and thinking that I was the only one who could do the thing, whatever the thing was. Coming from a graphic design background, that was very precious to me, of course. And that was my sacred cow. And I was like, I like being a graphic designer. And it was really like part of my identity. And I had to really learn to give up that part of my identity and to get more flexible about what my identity is as a person. Because as a business owner, like you said, you stretch and flex and grow and change so much. And you can't tie your identity to any one thing or any one stage in your life or any role within your career. And I think that was probably like the biggest thing that I had to get over and learn that it's never going to be just that one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's not going to be that one thing. And especially if what do you want? Like, how do you want to grow and develop? Because if you just hold on and just continue to do that one thing, you're not growing, you're not developing. And that's okay. Some people are totally fine and happy. And you still really need those people too that are just experts and like, I will just want to be a graphic designer and I'm just going to do this one thing really well and not worry about anything else. But I think it just comes down fundamentally of what do you want out of the business? What do you want out of yourself? Growth do you see? Like, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I think that's always good reflection to kind of figure out and dig deep of like, what do you fundamentally really want? That's important. And how do you go out and get it? Because like how you get to be a graphic designer is different than the steps it takes to be a business owner.
1,000%. And you're so right that you really have to think about, okay, well, where do I want to take things in the future? Because, if I went back to the 20 something year old me, I would have told 20 something year old me to take more business classes. I took some, could have taken more. But that transition and that growth and that changing of my goals has really come from being a business owner. And I feel like I have such a different understanding of people and processes and what people are capable of and what I'm capable of building if I am okay with stepping back from control. And my relationship with control has changed dramatically over the last several years of my life as I've gone through that journey of being a business owner.
Yeah, absolutely. Releasing control is probably one of the biggest things, especially when it's like, I can do this. I believe I can do this very well or at a higher level, but allowing the control to happen of releasing it to somebody else is maybe only going to get 80% of what you get. As I believe Dan Martello always says is 80% is a lot better than 0% is to get out of other people and a team and even too, you get so much out of them, like you mentioned, of seeing other people grow.
Well, and how they've helped me grow because I've hired people who are so much better than me in certain areas. For example, when I first hired a project manager, I was trying to think through how to structure their job or maybe even telling them how to do their job. And I realized that if you hire someone who's really competent at their job, they can tell you how to do it. And I
Mhm.
don't go to my project manager telling her how to set something up. She comes to me and says, "Here's how I think that we should do this. Let's walk through this together." And I really look for those skills that are different from mine and people who approach problem solving far differently from me and have a different academic background and different life experience background, because it's so easy to get in a box and it's so easy to get focused on just that one view, and having a view from other people who have a completely different experience, type of job, life experience, place in their career. It has been so eye opening for me. I feel like I've learned so much just from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that keeps you unlocking new doors and new opportunities is when other people have input that you wouldn't have seen because we all look at things so differently. I always try to come to every conversation or anybody I'm working with or talking to that I have something to learn from everybody. Like somebody fundamentally is probably knows something more than I do on some level in some category or area because none of us can know it all. So that's what I think is always like a good attitude to come into every conversation, even if it's somebody who's just starting out or is an intern or wherever they're at in their career.
Well, I think that's so important to foster that culture so that somebody who is starting in their career feels like that they can bring up things that they're learning and they're not going to get like slapped on the wrist for it. And to keep that environment of continuous learning and for people to be excited about that. And it even goes to structuring days so that we're not going too crazy on cranking out materials every day and making sure that there's time for staff development and time for those conversations around, "Oh, this here's this new cool thing that I'm learning," because I think that that really ties into culture too and being intentional, with setting your culture to be a culture of learning.
Yeah. I think it's a good example because I always find people always say like culture, like, oh, we're all about building the culture. But it's like, what do you mean by building the culture? What does that fundamentally mean in practice? Like, what are the actions and steps you're doing? And I think that's a good example. Like, one piece of culture is like, how do you handle mistakes? And what is your openness to trying new things? And do you have a culture that's open to trying new things? Well, if you do, then you can't hammer people for mistakes because mistakes are going to come out of trying new things. So I think that is a huge balance and a very important piece in business. Part of your culture is like, how do you handle mistakes in,
Oh,
trying
absolutely.
new things?
I completely agree. I have an internal PowerPoint. You don't see anything of it on our website or like our external communication materials, but I go through it with new hires and then I bring it up with the staff from time to time as well, where we have our internal pillars and how we treat each other, how we treat our clients. And one of the big pillars is admitting to when we make mistakes and that that's okay, but it's not something that we can sweep under the rug and we need to go through the steps to make something right. And having that backbone of internal culture and having it like written out and something that I go through with new hires, I think has been so helpful in not only setting expectations, but to just help steer that ship and for people to all feel like they're sailing in the same direction together.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to get into a little bit of kind of your guys' business model and value prop and everything else, like you guys kind of have this intersection of like brand strategy, design, commercial photography, all these things. But how have you found the best way to really like package and portray the value of all those services together when you are working with new clients?
Sure. Coming from the background of design, that's always been my first language, if you will. And I think there are some really huge opportunities to leverage design to help with telling a brand story and to leverage a strategy. And I think when you have strategy paired with really good design communication and really good copywriting, that's when it can be incredibly effective. So I think of design as being really integral to our process in telling a story well and telling a story in a way that people will grab a hold of and be excited about. And like I'm super detail oriented and picky about that and my designers know that, but I think it is one of the things that sets us apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that presentation element is so key, right? Like people make decisions, I think, about what they believe in something is that first perception. And design is so much of that, like portraying that first perception. And then what about in terms of like, how have you approached over the years of like what vertical industries clients you go after? You find yourself like very like, I talk to agencies, some agencies are kind of, we're open service to anyone or go after a niche specific industry. Have you found it's better to go after like a niche specific industry or category? And has that kind of evolved organically or intentionally throughout the years?
It's in an evolution right now, actually, because we had previously been very heavily focused in the agriculture industry. However, the agriculture industry is undergoing huge shifts right now, as are many industries. But that industry in particular has been hit with just like a perfect storm of things that have been happening. So because of all the major changes in the egg industry, it's still a portion of our business, but we're also leaning more heavily into nonprofit work as well as what I'll call like local business. So businesses in our Chicago region.
Yeah, awesome. And then I love this, like, you have a big focus on, like, being a problem-solving partner, which I think fundamentally, especially as, like, a service-based industry that agencies are in, I think our, like, number 1 value prop is that we're solving a problem, and then we just underneath the marketing advertising, there's a lot of different ways we can solve different problems for our clients, whether that's they need new brand positioning or they need a website or they need SEO or they need paid. There's a lot of different ways that we can solve problems. But what does it look like on your guys' end, that process you take new clients through on solving their problems? And how do you diagnose and identify like what is their problem versus maybe what they think sometimes their problem is that it's not? We run into that a lot. Think we have this problem, but really you have this problem.
Exactly. I think that's the first step in the process because, to your point, a lot of times the problem that's stated might not be what the actual issue is. It could be that they want people, for example, more people to sign up for a tour of their facility or sign up for their email list, and they aren't getting enough conversions. And then we look at their form that they have to have their prospect fill out, and the form that the prospect has to fill out has like 27 form fields on it. So no one wants to fill out that form. So I think looking through that whole journey of their prospect is incredibly important, including the sales process. And sometimes sales and marketing can have a little bit of friction, as we all know. So really understanding how does that whole prospect journey work? And when we hand off from marketing to sales, is there a smooth transition there or are things that we need to work through? If we capture an email address, that's great. But is there some sort of process to nurture that email address? Or did we only get as far as capturing an email address? So it's asking those questions and really coming at it from a point of wanting to be a good partner, wanting to understand and listening to understand, and not trying to sell a preconceived notion, trying to listen to understand first and make sure we really know what the problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we could all kind of take a step back and do because sometimes I think we could be a hammer. It's just like we have one tool, solve it with this. But how do you take a step back and understand like what's the fundamental problem and like you said, like really looking in depth at what can marketing solve for one? Because sometimes I think some businesses or some brands try to solve business fundamental problems with marketing. And sometimes there's like, for example, like a sales system, they might want more marketing, but if they don't have a sales process in the back end, then they can drive a lot of leads and not have a follow-up system. And so the marketing needs to be lost. So I think that's kind of like a big first step is really identifying and understanding like where are you currently at in your business journey, let alone your marketing journey, to identify what the real problem is and what's holding you back.
I totally agree with you, James. And sometimes, like, us marketers aren't a fit for some of these business problems because it could be an organizational structural problem. It could be something like they want to sell online, but they have zero inventory control. So there's no way that we can help them out as marketers yet. And there's so many business issues that I've been tempted to jump into and help solve because we're in problem solving field. But I've learned over the years there are places where marketing really isn't a good fit. It's a business coach who might be a better fit, or someone who's really there for helping with sales process and then come back to marketing. Because you're right, we can't solve everything with marketing.
Yeah, exactly. We've even seen it from a paid perspective where some clients will like they don't have any good foundation built. They don't really understand the communication that needs to happen with their customer who they're trying to reach. So then they don't have good content or they don't have a good landing page that's properly optimized to handle cold traffic. They have a website that's built for really warm traffic that people are familiar with them. So then they want to run paid ads, but then it doesn't work for a landing page. So there's a lot of like fundamental things that they need to have set up. But once they do have those set up, then like paid ads can work really well. Is what we tell people is that paid ads works really well as fuel on a fire, but is not your fire starter. Your fire starter is your brand strategy and your design and your whole business like marketing foundation. Those all things have to be set up first. And then you can go to tactics like SEO or paid or these other places to drive traffic. But I think the same thing can happen between the business to marketing side is that you have to have some foundational pieces set up before you can go market successfully.
I completely agree with that. In fact, we're building out a subscription program specifically for local businesses to get them to that point to be ready to take the next step. And that foundational work is so important. And literally starting there. And if you don't have a massive budget, just making sure that that positioning is in a really good place. Because to your point, you can't turn on paid ads if you don't have the messaging that's going to resonate with your audience, or you don't have a follow through for sales, and then we're just pouring money down the drain, even if we have a really good paid ad campaign that could perform really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, cause what we always talk about is like we want to transition what you're paying for through ads to owning something. So it's like you have to have that transaction. Like we're paying for ads, what are we getting back for those ads? Is that leads? Are those sales? Like is it just exposure, increase in views or growth of a specific channel? But we have to get something back in return for paid ads. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But I think that's a good way to look at a good framework for most things is like, what am I getting back off of this? And what is the foundation I'm building and that might take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to build, but kind of having that forward thinking to kind of figure that out. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was you kind of mentioned about distilling your message into like its simplest form. You are like, especially like in the ag business, I can imagine this can be maybe complicated from a communication standpoint. A lot of these, especially B2B, a lot of B2B business have a really challenge of simplifying things down into its simplest form. But like, what's your magic process for kind of simplifying and making things easy for consumers or clients or whoever they're trying to reach, understand brand messages?
I've I've changed my approach on that over the last couple of years. I've started for many new clients building a marketing roadmap for them where we start with a conversation, ideally in person, like a 90-minute sit down. It's not crazy long, but enough to really get into the meat of their business. And it's it's questions from me, but it feels very laid back, and I have some cards that they go through and choosing emotions that they want their customers to feel in working with them, for example. And then some emotions that they want people to have, the end user of their product to have. And as we go through that process and that conversation, I'm getting the information I need to build out a marketing roadmap for them where we are laying out, all right, who is your customer? Because sometimes that's not fully defined. Or the person who lets you in the door might not be the person who actually closes the sale. So really making
Mm,
sure that we all understand that. And then going through the brand hierarchy and saying, okay, like what is the product that you're selling, but what is the emotional value of that product? It's not just that you do taxes, for example, you take off the emotional burden of the stress that as business owners face. And, I'm looking at the April 15th tax deadline coming up because it's mid-April that we're talking right now, as one example of that. So I think helping people verbalize what they actually offer, not just in terms of a product, but in terms of the emotional value, is incredibly important. And making sure we're all on the same page about that and that we're all on the same page about who their customer is and writing that down, because then we can get to the point of building out messaging lanes for their different customers and building out those value propositions and all of those things that make marketing work. But I think that that foundational work is so incredibly important. And even though that document's quite short, it's 4 pages, that then becomes the source of truth from which other things are written. And in many, if not most cases, I prefer to start from that, even if it's project based work where we have that baseline of understanding no matter what the project is.
Yeah, I love that. Especially that I think it's actually a good thing that it's short and condensed because I've seen some of those that can be 20,
Yeah.
30, 40 pages and nobody really reads them or you don't know where to go to them. And like all the nuggets are too deep to even extract and pull out and know how to use. But especially since I think so many the standard always with marketing with like even the audience is broad strokes, which from a paid ads perspective can somewhat work is like broader targeting has tended to outperform more narrow targeting over the years as ad platforms algorithms have gotten better. But I think where that is most impactful is the messaging, is the content, is what do you say and what do you communicate to? Because if you target like 20 to 54-year olds, if it's a B2B or a B2C product, both of those, there's audience segments within there that communicate differently to different types of messages. And so I think it's very important to really understand, like on a deeper level, we have this kind of broad audience of people who are buying or are potential customers, but how do we communicate differently to different subsegments of those and then come out with content and messaging that aligns with those different audiences, I think is really important.
Right. And that was my frustration that a lot of businesses don't have the budget to do those 40-page documents, but they do need something. And they want something simple. They
Uh-huh.
want something that is not incredibly complex. But also ideally want something that we can hand off, for example, to a paid media partner like you, so that you know and you have that actual foundational data about here's what the person makes decisions based on so that you're not guessing on that. And I've come to realize, and I'm speaking as a business owner myself as well, business owners want something more simple, and it can't be that 30-page document. It needs to be something where it's digestible and that it is not difficult to get through. And what can we do to continue to simplify decision making for business owners, but also make it accessible and make it clear so that they can take that next step?
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned you have kind of like a starter package. Could you kind of dive into that a little bit more of like what's the goal or outcome or why did you create that kind of I don't know if you call it like an entry level kind of product or initiative, but what does that look like and who is that designed for?
Yeah. It might be something that we might have to have another conversation about down the road because it's still in development and I'm making some changes to it. But my frustration came from that typically when people are engaging with an agency, that spend is anywhere from 4,000 on up per month. And there's a floor. And if you are under that floor, really don't qualify for agency services. And then you're cobbling together a team of freelancers or students and interns, and it's just not as efficient as it could be. So I wanted to create something that was under 30,000 a year that would still give businesses value and allow them to start to grow their marketing foundation to get ready to go to that next level and be ready to go to an agency relationship. And that was my thinking behind creating a subscription program. We're calling it the Business Boost program so that they get some of those foundational marketing strategy elements at a price point that is not prohibitive to them.
Nice. That's amazing. Yeah, so it's really serving a business sector that is under basically served by your standard average agency, and you're giving them solutions or access to high level agency work
Yeah.
is kind of the goal
And I
output.
don't know about you, but I've run into a number of businesses that have grown very successfully over the years without employing marketing, but then realize that they need marketing and they're like, where do we start? So it's
Right.
not
Yep.
necessarily the businesses that are just starting out, even, although that can certainly apply. There's a lot of really successful businesses out there who have grown through word of mouth and who've grown through their email lists, but they realize to get to the next level, they need to be doing something differently. And the old way of doing things suddenly isn't working anymore. And it can be a little bit intimidating going from 0 to 60 and not knowing what to do and just feeling like, okay, well, I don't want to be throwing spaghetti at the wall. Let's do something that is systematic and that moves the needle for us truly and that's grounded in strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you hop on Instagram or YouTube or Google search and just search marketing tactics or solutions, it's going to be overwhelming with the number of different directions and things that is the only way of doing everything. And there's going to be 100 different opportunities and tactics and solutions. So I think that can be quite overwhelming for somebody who is entry level or just trying to figure out where to start with their marketing and how to build something
I
out.
think it's entry level even for those of us who have experience. There's just so much like it's constant rush of information and there's so much to wade through and it's
Yeah.
hard to tell what is real and what isn't real. And if we can provide businesses something that's grounded in strategy and something that really speaks to their audience and the need stakes of their audience and we know that that's a place of truth that we can then continue to build out from. And we're not building from a shaky foundation. And, it goes back to your example of ads. The paid ads don't work if there isn't a good foundation under that. So let's build a really good foundation first, and everything else can be layered on top of that later.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta start with that strategy, the foundation, and then start going into the tactics. Another big transition that's happened, and we were just kind of before the call started, we were diving into and nerding out a little bit about is kind of AI and its involvement. My fundamental belief is I think that experts are going to get 100 times the output if they learn how to use these AI platforms and tools at a much greater scale than somebody who is just trying to figure it out for themselves or doesn't have that strategic eye to know what is good or what is fundamentally wrong to do or incorrect information. So I think there's going to be a huge leverage point for agencies that figure out how to use AI automations and workflows to integrate it in and produce better work at a lower cost or just produce more work for the clients. But how are you using or incorporating AI tools or platforms into your guys' current workflow?
I have really been getting more into AI agents over the last just like couple of months, honestly, because I, like many people, have been in Chat GPT and figuring that out and learning how that works. And have suddenly realized in the world of Claude and co-work that there's this whole other world of agents being able to act on my behalf. And I think the two things that are exciting to me are providing context properly to AI so that I can get the best results possible. And what are the ways that I need to provide context in order to get those results? Because it's it's more like supercharged Google if there isn't context, right? So, how
Yeah.
can we get really good about providing good context to AI so we can get good results from chats and that kind of thing? But then, where can I leverage AI agents in my processes? And it's not for me based on it's not based on like the newest shiny thing. It's based on what are repetitive processes, what are things that take a lot of time, what doesn't really require strategy. Let's knock those off first. Like I was just talking to you about how I was excited that we could leverage Claude to set up projects in Asana for us, our product management system. And it can do a lot of the heavy lifting. It doesn't have the strategy and it can't do it all. There's still a decent amount of human work, but it takes off 60% of the human work maybe. And I think that's going to continue to be true for more and more things. I still want to get further into testing how can we push it in PowerPoint? How much can it do in PowerPoint for us? If we build an ad, will we be able to get to a point where we can confidently deploy AI to resize that ad for us? Right now, we still don't quite trust it enough to do that properly, but I'm sure it's going to get there and the day is going to happen that it gets there. So, it's a combination of continuing to test new things, trust but verify, because as you and I were saying, there's about 20% of the results that are just plain wrong or incorrect. And a human needs to check those things. And looking at it from a place of our processes first and not chasing like the newest shiny thing. It's more about like
Mhm.
how can I leverage AI to improve existing processes and to shorten that distance from A, B, C, D? Can I make it go from A to D, but then there's a human check before we do another jump?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I just think it's when we come down to like really thoughtful processes and workflow. Like, what are all the steps that it takes to do a specific task or a project or everything? And then I think what's really going to happen is the more, like you mentioned, like the context you give it is fundamental to the output, is context and training. I think the more context and training you get, then it's going to get better and better at solving those problems where the errors that it has or the output is going to get significantly better as it trains. It's the same way I think we kind of train employees over the years. We're going to train AI agents with context and trainings of like what's a good output, and then it's going to come up with that. But we've tested it out of like give it no context and no background and no examples and ask it for an output, and then give it all the context, our entire process that we normally would go through and the output. And the output is 10 times, 100 times better and closer to what we wanted, sometimes even better than what we would create on our own when we give it the context and the training and the examples and everything else. So I think that's why the people who already know how to do the things are going to get so much better output out of it because they can give the context and the training.
And it's why tools like Fathom and Otter are huge because we can take those conversations and upload them to AI and then use them to build out projects and use them to provide context for proposals and all of those things where previously humans might have been taking notes and we would have been building those things out from that. There's a first draft that AI can do now and make that so much faster. So when it comes to that proposal process, that's been compressed significantly thanks to that context that I can get from conversations with prospects. And then the question is, what is a good question? And what are the best questions that we can ask in order to allow our AI tools to take us to that step of a first proposal?
Yep, absolutely. What are other areas you think there are shifts that are happening? AI is obviously a big one, and maybe this another layer of AI implementation in some way. But what are other areas you see or shifts you see happening right now with companies or brands or marketing that you think most agencies are ignoring or slow to respond to that they should be activating on that brands and companies are going to need out of their marketing agencies and ad agencies?
I think there's two. One isn't really a marketing thing, and it's not sexy. You might want to cut this one, but I think process because as a small business owner, there are so many things that I just don't have time in the day to do. But AI as a tools and AI agents are allowing me to tackle things that I didn't necessarily document as thoroughly as I would have liked to if we were bigger. And now I'm suddenly seeing that because of the AI tools that are available to us, that process documentation can be so much more thorough and robust. And that makes for a machine that works really well. And I think that's true for any small business, not just marketers. But in terms of marketing specifically, I think something that has been fascinating to me, and I've been nerding out over the last couple of months, is the language of AI search and how are we being found online. And what I have been learning more of myself is that the architecture of the internet is built with as a super highway with signage, and that signage is schema markup. And that schema markup on the back end of websites is how AI search agents know that an FAQ page is an FAQ page. Lots of people have been hearing about like FAQ pages are really important to add to your site. Doesn't mean anything if you don't have FAQ schema with it. Making sure that there's local business schema attached to your website and making sure that's attached to your Google business profile and really starting to understand that architecture of the back end of the internet is how search finds information and that's how that information is organized. And then that's how that information is potentially surfaced through AI search results or through Google search results. That's been really interesting to see how that shift's been happening. And I know a lot of that ties back to traditional SEO, which has been around for 20 whatever years now, but it's being used differently. And I think it's getting different attention now because it's being used differently. And we're writing content differently because of the way that AI search works now. So that's all really just exciting to me.
Yeah. And then something else you were mentioning with that is a lot of businesses, especially a lot of small businesses, build with like a Squarespace or other front end page building type of websites. And then could you explain or talk a little bit about kind of what you found there with like those not being set up in the right way to have that schema for like an FAQ to get that kind of communication flow between
Yeah,
the
there's a
platforms?
number of issues that most likely are problems for many, if not most small businesses. If you've gone through SEO work and worked with an SEO professional, they've probably made these changes to your site. But if you haven't, it's probably true that it hasn't been done for you yet and you're more invisible online because of them. And those issues are that schema markup. And there's different types of schema depending on the page. There's a blog schema for your blog page. There's a local business schema that you have on your homepage. There's FAQ schema. There's an About Us section schema. That is all set through an agreement between Microsoft and Google and all of the big search engines where schema.org says what the schema is. And then that is what goes on your website. And a lot of those builders have like generic schema, and some of them might have the schema built out, but some of them don't. And some of them, not some of them, I would say most of them are probably missing. Google business profiles are incredibly important now, and you don't have to have a storefront, a physical storefront to have a Google business profile. And that's attached to your local business schema. And you also see the ratings for your business through the Google business profile, which helps give you legitimacy in the eyes of AI search. Having that Google business profile be active and making sure that you're getting ratings and that you're giving responses to ratings is massive. Making sure that you have correct heading tags, the H1, H2, H3 tags, and using those tags on your website appropriately is also very important. And so many businesses don't use them. I personally hadn't realized just how important it was to have the H2 and H3 and use those in a way that is it helps AI search find information better and writing for AI search with that in mind. So instead of having like paragraphs of text, using those H tags to break up those paragraphs of text in a way that makes it easier for AI search to find that information.
Yep, absolutely. Wow. I think that was an absolute masterclass breakdown to simplify like simple steps I think any business can do to kind of improve their SEO and their AI search and all of that. So thank you for sharing that. I think more to come with that, all of that, and how AI is going to kind of open up a lot of doors and different ways of setting up and structuring websites and marketing campaigns and everything else. I think my last question on the whole AI thing is what have you seen it do from you're obviously you kind of have you have a design background as like your main, where you start your main like your roots is in design. What do you see out of it doing for anything design? Any platforms you use that does well with design work? And like, do you see that as an area that's going to grow and
I think it
improve?
is. I think the Adobe suite is behind in many places. And I was just talking to my team about that very recently, in that I'm not seeing the advances in multi document page layout in AI that I expect to see from the Adobe suite right now. If you look at the advances in Photoshop, they're tremendous. You see image generation and image manipulation changes at a clip that's so fast it's hard to keep up with it. Things that used to take me as a designer or a photographer 6, 7 hours to do now take like that. It's 30 seconds and it's done. The same is not true for other aspects of design yet. And I'm curious when those changes are going to shift within the professional tools that we use. Because at the end of the day, Canva, for example, has AI tools, but is it set up for commercial print production and, like a 100-page book? No, it's not. So we need those tools built into the Adobe suite, or if someone else is out there coming up with a new AI system for professionals that is kind of behind right now, and I'm just waiting for like something to shift there and something to change there. I think we can use it for mockups. You can use Firefly to show a client a concept that previously might have had to have been sketched or provided as a mood board. Now we can provide it as a mockup of here's what it looks like in Firefly. In terms of using AI imagery only going forward, I think that's a really slippery slope. I think AI video and AI imagery can get into uncanny valley really quickly. And I think it's important to be thinking intentionally about where we're keeping the humanity in our communication, both in design and in writing, because a lot of companies went off the deep end in having AI do all of their communication writing for them or their social media posts. And when I'm scrolling through social media, I'm sure you do the same too. There's so many posts where I'm like, oh, AI wrote that. I'm going to ignore that. The short sentences structure, just like the
Yep.
structure of the post, you start reading it and you're like, oh, this is fake. It's AI.
Yep. Yeah. That's what
Yeah.
you call
And
AI slop. That it's one of the biggest downsides of AI is anybody can produce huge volumes of content and it's
yeah. And
all just slop. And there's no meaning behind
there's
it.
nothing there. Or yes, it is trained on your business, but is it saying something in a way that is as emotionally resonant as a human would say? Probably not. Is it the kind of thing where it gets you like, good enough? I think good enough, the floor for good enough has changed. I think similarly to the 90s, if you go back to the 90s and look at the magazines from the 80s, they were horrible. The layouts were just terrible. And we had this regression when computers were introduced because there were all these new tools that were exciting, but nobody knew how to use them properly. And they were just throwing clip art everywhere, for example. And you look back at those magazines, it's like, oh
Yeah.
my lord, that's terrible. You look back at the magazines from the 60s and 70s, and there's some incredible, amazing layouts that really stand the test of time. And part of it was because there were limitations there, and working against those limitations actually can produce better results. And I think the same is true for AI, where anyone can generate an image, or anyone can use AI to write a story. But is that good? And that question of good enough and what is good enough, I think, is what is playing out in front of our eyes right now. And as communicators, we need to be thinking about that human element of how are we connecting with people on a human level. And that is so important to our job right now, and to not lose that humanity and not to lose that human connection in what we're doing.
Absolutely. I think it'll come if people will use it for the 80% as like a starting point and then refine, edit, adjust. Same ways you would have like a junior copywriter maybe write some stuff and then there'd be a refinement editing process. It's like, where is the editing process? It's already doing, so much so fast. Like, let's spend the time on editing to have some real deeper
Yeah.
connection and insight.
Or start with a human idea, like,
So
it came from brainstorming, it came from people, it came from having conversations, and it came from authentic connections, but then how can we use AI to maybe push that further in new directions, but it still comes from something that's very centered in conversations.
yeah, absolutely. You kind of answered this question a little bit, but I always ask is I think you mentioned earlier, like in your 20 years, you're like, I wish I took more business classes. But if you could have given yourself younger self, one piece of advice as you're kind of entering in that agency business, what would have that advice have been other than
My
take more
younger
business
self, what would
classes?
the advice be? I think maybe be more fearless. I think being a business owner means stepping off a ledge into the unknown repeatedly. I think about Indiana Jones in the movie where he was stepping off and then the step appeared. It feels like that to me as a business owner in so many aspects, from hiring your first employee to setting up health insurance for people and all of the things that go into the mechanics of running a business. And at some point, you have to embrace that unknown. You have to embrace change, and you have to be okay with dismantling what you've built sometimes to build something better. And for that not to hold you back or to make you feel like you failed. And I've had to go through those dismantlings and rebuildings as a business owner. So I think it's that willingness to embrace change and just step into the unknown. What about you though? I want to hear your answer to this one.
Yeah. That's so good. That the picture I just got of Indiana Jones stepping on the stats, it was like the perfect. That is such a good analogy because it is so true. Because even if you never have really what it comes down to is like fundamentally, you never have all the information to make the best decision. So you have to make a leap of faith somewhere and be fearless to make that decision in order to do it. I have a couple things I've talked about before. Is like one is I would tell my younger self, like, do not worry about mistakes. Like, mistakes are going to happen. It's going to hurt in the moment, but over 5 years, 10 years, it's a blimp on your whole career. It's not going to have any impact on you long term. So, like, do not let it make you lose more than one night's sleep. So that'd probably be one. And then two is focus. I wish I just focused more. Like I had one thing working really well, and I wish I just focused like double, triple down on one thing. And instead I tried to chase the shiny object of like other businesses, other models to make more money, and it all came out of stemming out of like fear and a scarcity mindset fundamentally. And I wish I didn't do that and just like went all in on one thing and just became the best at one thing. And I somewhat did that, but it was like a 70% take rather than like 110% of myself. And so I think I would have been a lot
That's
further
really
ahead if I would have
insightful.
done that.
But those things took you to where you are today, like, without having gotten through that, like, that's how you learn.
Sure. For sure. It is, but like I would have told I like if I could go back now though and tell myself I'd be like, don't worry about those things. Like don't even waste your time. They're fundamentally like a waste of time. They're a it's a circus. So don't go to the circus. Like just stay out of it. It's not even worth it. But yes, at the end of the day, like I don't regret any of it, right? Like I don't regret anything I think it all happened for a reason. I'm like here today because of all of it and all of that. But if I could, I would tell
Wouldn't
myself
it be
like, don't worry
nice?
about those things. Don't waste your time and money on these
It would be so
these side
awesome to be
quests.
able to come back
Yeah.
as, like, a 20-year-old, but with the knowledge of a 40-year-old, I'd like that.
For sure. I think that's like every wise person's dream is be like, I wish my 60-year-old self could go back to my 20-year-old body with my mindset now and have some wisdom
Wouldn't
of,
change it though,
what's
like,
gonna
that's
happen.
hard-won wisdom.
But
I don't think I'd be willing to go back to 20 without what I learning.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's just the way life is. I don't think you can't change
Yeah.
it. It's just, how things play out. But it's all good. Right on. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. Appreciate all the wisdom and insights and knowledge that you shared with us. So we appreciate you, and we'll get this live
Thanks
and
for having
shared
me, it was a lot of fun.
very soon. Awesome. Right on. Have a good one all.